We've got Chad Wall here, who's an agricultural consultant, and he's been using structured water on his farm. Super excited to learn all about the benefits of using structured water and how you, as a farmer, can grow more yield when you just think a little bit more about the type of water that you're using. And I know for me, I've used my structured water on my garden, and my plants are like Superman now. So, Chad, welcome. Thank you so much for sharing today. I'm really looking forward to hearing how you got into structured water and your.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. So, how did you begin your journey as a farmer?
Well, I was born and raised on a farm here in Texas, primarily growing cotton. Several other crops that we rotated with cotton for high residue as the requirements were back in the day. Didn't really think that much about, all of the intricacies of farming or why we did what we did. I was just the typical laborer on the farm, and I did what my dad told me to do, and I listened to his stories and listened to his stories of my grandfather and, why my grandfather did the things that he did and why his dad did the things that he did. And so anyway, it was, multiple generations being passed down, even though we weren't always all working together. We were always gleaning from, the things that the last generation had witnessed. And so anyway, I was required to go to college because that's what my parents thought was really beneficial for me, and which was fine. It was a good time. I went to Texas Tech and got my undergraduate degree in agriculture with a teaching certificate. Then decided to go to graduate school because I wasn't really ready to go back to the farm. So I went to graduate school and studied sustainable agricultural systems and figured out that, there might be a little bit more going on in the world, and particularly in how ecosystems are functioning, that we could assist if we were a little bit more diligent in paying attention to the things that we were doing and how that was affecting other crops and other systems, even in our own rotation. And so after graduate school, I came back to the farm and was ready to begin my career, and was married then and ready to start my family, and was very excited about no-till farming because that's what I had begun to study, and learned that there were a lot of benefits to not tilling the soil and preventing wind and water erosion, and all of those things were very beneficial. And what we were calling sustainable at the time, we were trying to be more sustainable. And so we started putting those things into practice, stopped tilling, traded equipment to have the right kind of equipment to be able to farm in a no-till system, and continued down that road. That led me to being asked to speak at a conference for a couple of years that was introducing some of the techniques we were doing to some growers in another area here in the Midwest. And actually, it was through that I met some other consultants at the time who were talking about soil health and things that were going on in the soil that were completely different than the things that I understood about what my college education and my experience had taught me about the way we fertilize soil and the way that we use pesticides and the reason that we use pesticides and all of these other things. And so it was very fascinating to me to start having discussions with these men who were talking about another way that could be done, and in fact a way that was more in alignment with the way that the system was created to work and the way that it functions without our intervention. And so I began to study about those principles and learn about all of that stuff along the way. I was really intrigued with water and how water functions. And, and again, witnessing what I had witnessed and hearing stories throughout time of why is rainwater so different than the water that we apply with our irrigation systems? Why does it produce a different result? A little bit of rainwater has a tremendous impact as opposed to a whole lot of irrigation doesn't necessarily produce the same thing that a little bit of rainwater does. And so I was curious about those things, but I didn't really have a solution. I was theorizing that there were different things in the atmosphere, electrical things that were going on, and a lot of different things that were impacting what I believed the porosity of the soil and the way the soil aggregation was taking place so that that water was more easily absorbed and could more readily get to where it needed to be. And so a lot of those things may in fact be impacted, but it's actually an energetic effect that's contributing to all of that. And so anyway, I didn't have all those answers at that point. I was just, spending my time on the tractor and checking sprinklers and, planting crops and harvesting crops and learning what I could along the way. And along the way, I really started studying reverse osmosis water, because I determined that if we used that to apply our pesticides, we could reduce the active ingredient and we could use a whole lot less additional things to treat the water to make the chemicals work better. And so that's what kind of really got me into studying water and how its effect changes based on the way that we handle it and a lot of those types of things. So I started doing a lot of chemical pesticide applications with reverse osmosis water. Didn't really have any real resistance for it. I didn't try to irrigate with it at that time, but we were just using it for other applications. And so move on down the road a few more years, decide that we wanted whole house filtration for our own home. And I was thinking that RO would be the way to go. And as I started researching exactly how I wanted to do that and whether I wanted to use a system similar to what I had been using on the farm for my whole house filtration, I began to really consider all the things that I didn't like about RO. I didn't like the amount of water that was being rejected. And where we had a lot of total dissolved solids, we were rejecting as much as 70% of the water that we were pumping, that we were just having to find a place to go with it, which really didn't satisfy, that innate passion in me for being conservative and being economical and really trying to figure out how to use resources well. It just didn't fit my model, because I knew that we were discarding more than half of the water that we were pumping just to get this super clean water that was good for a lot of things. But anyway, there were a number of things I didn't like about that, and so I didn't really have any peace in continuing to pursue that. And it was through looking at alternatives that I came across structured water. Never heard of it. Very intriguing, sounded a little bit fishy. And so, I really dug into, well, what does that mean and how does that work? And so over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, I started really digging into, well, structured water. What is, who can explain that and how does that happen and how do you produce it? And it was through all of that it actually led me to, well, I think a very simple way is actually the best way, because that emulates what is taking place in a natural ecosystem. As the water's moving through the cycle, the water's moving through mineral and rock stratas, the water's moving down stream beds, it's being caught in lakes, and all of those things really made sense from a standpoint of, I don't think that we're dispersed all over the world to not have access to good water. And so what's the difference? It can't be that we all need some special super clean industrialized sanitized water take with us wherever we go. That doesn't make sense. I believe that we were all meant to have water that serves our most basic needs wherever we are. And a way to accomplish that really intrigued me. And so I started investing in structured water equipment to try and figure out, what it was doing, or if it was doing anything, or if people just thought it was doing something. And, and not to say that intention doesn't potentially have a lot of impact, but I wanted to know if there was something more than just the intention of what these people were doing, as opposed to, something that was real and tangible and that could be validated. And so that's what I began pursuing. Did some experiments here, could immediately see some changes, taste some changes that were unexplainable, other than, wow, the water has been changed somehow. And so we did some animal experimenting, some of it by accident. We didn't know that just by structuring the water coming from our well that it was going to change the way that our horses were drinking water and changing the ways that some of the other animals were using water. And so I knew that wasn't placebo, because their intention wasn't to expect that water to do something different. They were just responding to the changes in the water. And so that really fascinated me.
How are they changing? What were the horses doing to respond to structured water?
One horse in particular was what our veterinarians in our area called diluter. He just drank, and they, everyone anticipates that that's probably a kidney function issue or something along those lines. And so if he was standing in a stall, he would just drink until there was no more water. And if you kept a water tub in front of him, then he would just drink and urinate all day. I mean, if he was standing there, that's what he was doing. And he might circle the pen and come back and drink some more, but for the most part, that's all he did was stand and drink if he was held in a small area. And so after we structured the water, it was about 2 days later that my daughter, who was in charge of the horses, came in and said, "Tom's not drinking water like he has been." And I thought, well, that's curious. Let's see what's wrong. That was my first reaction is, well, let's see what's wrong. We need to watch him because he's gone off water. And so what we came to see over the next few more days was that, no, he is drinking water and he's doing fine. There's nothing wrong with him. He's just not continuously drinking water like he was. And so then she noted that the other horses are drinking more water than they used to. And it was like, well, that's interesting. And so then we started piecing all of that together and realizing that, wow, whatever it was that Tom was lacking that he was trying to get from that water, he was able to get once we structured it. And he's never gone back to drinking water the way that he did before. And so we actually still have him now, this many years later, and he still doesn't drink water the way that he used to. But of course, all of his water has been structured since then.
Yeah. So what do you think happened? I mean, we had a great chat with Patrick. We learned all about structured water, but what's going on with the water?
I think it's several things. I think it's the energetics. I mean, I think that, it's partially hydration. I mean, it's, an animal, particularly if we think about hydration and we consider all of the things that people like Gina Bria have researched in regard to how cellular beings, animals, humans, whatever, how they get hydrated, it has a lot to do with structured water. It's not just structured water, and it's not just water that has been structured, but it's the water within plants. It's, there are a lot of things that go into that. So if you consider an animal that does not have access to the right kind of water, and they're not free foraging, because, most of the animals that we use now, that certainly recreational animals or beasts of burden type animals, they're not free range animals anymore. They're being contained. And so, like a lot of animals, even in confinement operations, it's just one of the things that's wrong with that whole scenario is that they're being fed very dehydrating things, because all of their hay, all of their forages, all of their grains, everything that they're being fed in the ration it's very dehydrating, and it's having minerals and salts added to it. And it's not that they don't need those things, but all of those things are contributing to a very dehydrating state, just like they would be for us. Mm-hmm. And so the only thing he had to remedy that was the water that was being provided. And so once we changed that water, I think it totally changed his level of hydration. And so, what he was doing was basically the same thing that happens when you over irrigate. You put on a whole lot of water and a whole lot of water runs off, but you don't really change the level of hydration for the plants or for the soil or for the microbes, because that water is not readily available. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was a lot of it. The energetics of the water could have been different, such that it gave him some more mineral availability. It could have stimulated some microbes in his gut that actually changed some things, so that he was able to, totally change his metabolism or the things that his body was trying to get back into order. And so, most of these are theories. I mean, the more I learn and the more I experience, the more I can theorize what I think is taking place. But those things are very hard to measure. And that's been one of our biggest challenges with really taking advantage of, telling the story of what structured water is changing, is that most people want science. We're very science minded And all of our chemistry is what drives our science. And we don't really think about the implications of biology and energetics and physics. We think about chemistry. And chemistry cannot measure what we're talking about.
No, because this is quantum, isn't it? This is on a quantum level.
Yes, it is. It's quantum.
We know our science doesn't allow us to study quantum. So the whole concept of this area of water is so exciting because, I mean, you saw almost an immediate response from your horse. And I have firsthand experience of seeing an immediate response with my little tiny garden. What was your response when you started using the water on your garden? Did you get an aha moment like me? Like overnight, it was just like Superman came through the the soil.
Yes, we did. We saw plants respond differently for sure. But again, it's hard to measure. You know, we don't have a way to measure that very effectively. And so that's why, you know, my journey has been seemingly long and drawn out for us to get as far as we have, because we haven't been able to take lab instrumentation out into a field or a garden and really measure what is taking place. Last year we were very fortunate in the consulting work that I was doing to start treating some center pivot irrigation where we had soil probes that were actually monitoring the moisture level in the soil. And we had those same probes in the same fields prior to adding structured water devices. And so we were able to do some comparative analysis of how much water was applied and how the crop responded in similar climatic conditions. And so it actually opened some doorways to my thinking in regard to we need to be measuring results much more than we need to be measuring what's taking place. Science is not really interested in results. They're interested in explaining what's taking place. And when we get sucked into that paradigm, we get stuck with trying to explain what's happening instead of just looking at the results and then providing data that is irrefutable based on, well, this is the only thing that changed. And, you know, just like for Tom, the only thing that changed in Tom's stall was that we started structuring the water. And it totally changed what was going on in Tom's body. And so, you know, those are the kinds of things that we really need to focus on in regard to let's measure what's taking place and focusing on trying to explain why it's happening so someone else has the answer to why it's happening instead of, no, these are very beneficial things. And so I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt, I have never put structured water somewhere that it did not help and never put structured water somewhere that it caused a problem.
Right.
Or that it, you know, that it caused anything that was damaging. And so, you know, those are the things that lead me to this, you know, this relatively newly found position being that if we're pumping water for anything, we can't afford for it not to be structured because it's just too easy to do it. And the benefits are far greater than we can even imagine. I mean, I don't think we've scratched the surface really of understanding everything that's taking place. We're beginning to see how to, record the results or measure the changes.
Right. So as an agricultural consultant, you help many farmers and you have a 3-step process on how they can make more money just by structuring the water. How is it for these farmers? Are they also seeing benefits and are they being wowed as much as I'm being wowed?
Yes, they are. You know, farmers are a little bit skeptical because they've been sold a lot of stuff. And in fact, in my opinion, conventional farmers have been sold so much stuff that's why they're stuck in the paradigm that they are, is because they have for multiple generations now, they have been sold what's not working. So much so that even considering that something else could work is an impossibility. You know, the only ones who are really able to consider it are either the ones that are relatively new and not steeped in all of the multi-generational belief system, or they're so sick and broke that they don't have any choice. They have concluded that what they've been doing is not working, and if they continue to do that, they're going out of business unless the government continues to bail them out. And you know, that's unfortunate, but it's what we see. And so, it's very encouraging when we can offer a glimmer of hope. That's what I say I am. I'm a minister of offering a little bit of hope, that we can hope in something that will produce a different result, that will be affordable, and that will be, regenerative, not just sustainable, but it will actually regenerate a lot of the things that are in a degrading process right now. Nobody loses. When we do the things that we're doing, everyone wins. I mean, the soil wins, the microbes win, the plants win, the consumer of whatever's being grown wins, and the producer wins because he's more profitable. And so all of those things line up into a scenario of, I can't not get up and do this because there's nothing else that I would rather be doing, because this is such an amazing thing to be part of and seeing the impacts that it can have. And so, yes, it's a simple process. The most challenging part of it is getting someone to consider that it might not be the way that it is.
It might not be, what was that?
That the things that they are accustomed to and what they believe to be taking place is not exactly the way that they think it is.
That's right. Yeah, we need a whole brand new way of thinking as we're building the new earth. And,
yes.
We also have to become farmers ourselves. We have to start thinking about growing our own gardens. And even though you speak with farmers, this information is just as powerful for the homeowner who perhaps wants to start growing their own food. And so can we talk a little bit about the three-step process that you have put together, and can we as household consumers use this three-step process for our own little gardens here in the homes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what we focus on is, and again, natural ecosystem restoration is the name of my company. And the reason for that name is because we focus on how would these ecosystems be functioning in a natural state if we were not here to have intervened and to have pushed and pulled and manipulated and tried to control for our benefit. How would this be functioning? And so diversity is very important. And obviously the word of the day in today's climate is diversity. We need to embrace all of the diverse things and all of the different roles that people, plants, and animals play. They're not all supposed to be the same. It doesn't make one better. It makes them different. It makes them, it puts them in a position of really needing to understand what the value is in the others, because without understanding the value of all of them, we're incomplete. So the system, an ecosystem is incomplete if you don't understand the value of all the things that go into that ecosystem. So diversity is very important. We focus on, the steps that you mentioned, being that we've got to get structured water into the system if we're using water at all. Now, if you get rainfall, all that you need, then structured water may not be that important. It still is important for using for, nutrition applications. We're doing some work this year validating some things that have been preliminarily shown to reduce nutrient applications, reduce pesticide applications, and still have the same efficacy as though a full rate had been applied just by using structured water. So we're continuing to validate that, but where we have seen the most success thus far is in irrigation water. By structuring that water, we've seen reductions as much as 30% in water usage, which obviously translates to a significant profitable position. While again, nobody loses. We're actually saving resources. We're conserving energy. We're conserving the water itself, and we're making more money in the process. And so that's a very good place to start. The second big part of what we do is to manage our nutrient applications very well by using some new technologies to actually evaluate what the plant's nutritional profile is, like a blood test. It's called plant sap analysis. So that it's like us taking a blood test and having the doctor look at that panel, and based on what we know it should be showing us, then we can evaluate whether the plant needs something, rather than just putting something out there, putting something in the soil or putting something on the plant just because we think it needs it, rather than actually letting the plant tell us what it needs based on how those nutrients are moving within the sap of that plant, basically how the metabolism is working. So that's the second part. And then thirdly, we call it letting nature do the work for us, which is understanding the diversity that's required in that system, making sure that we have a good gas exchange so that as the earth inhales and exhales, we're getting the gas exchange that the plant roots need and that the microbes need, so that they can all do what they were created to do. And the plants can take that free energy from the sun and they can turn that into carbohydrates like nothing else on earth can. And then all of those carbohydrates are then, not only used to grow that plant and help that plant produce all of the things that we need it to produce, but those carbohydrates actually feed the soil microbes in the most efficient way possible. And that's how we build those microbial communities in that rhizosphere there in the plants biome. And so all of that works hand in hand when you understand, where all of those limitations are and how to bring balance and how to allow them to do what they were created to do. Then the problem is solved and situation works very well. I mean, that whole system works very well when we understand how to support it. And I describe that as, we have to understand the things that we can do that will move that needle just a little bit in the direction of regenerative, even though we may not be able to get all of the way, in 1 year or 2 years or even 5 years. It's okay. We need to be making progress. So baby steps in the direction of doing a little bit more that's regenerative and a little bit less that's degenerative, so that we can move that needle just a little bit in the direction we want to go.
Yeah. And I can imagine structured water is also helping the soil, which has been damaged over the decades.
That's
from
correct.
all the farming. So it's such a beautiful, we're like healing Mother Earth by using structured water.
Yeah.
And it's one
correct.
generation at a time. But if we can get the young farmers with the mindset, oh gosh, what a fulfilling role to be giving the soil the most perfect structured water. I mean, it's just such a fulfilling role.
It is. Yes, it is.
So what is, as we conclude here, let's just say there's a farmer watching this and he's super excited or she's super excited. She wants to start right away. What's the process of getting structured water onto the farm? And what's the price point? And let's talk a little bit about the return on investment. I mean, you did say there's a yield of 30%, up to 30%, but what's the ROI time frame, and just look at that.
Well, based on, I'm getting some very good reports early season this year of some things that, again, we basically took, last year was the first full season that we had water devices in irrigation scenarios where we had a way to evaluate them. And so that produced obviously these very good results. And so all of the guys who were exposed to that knew that return on investment was so great that they put them everywhere. And certainly that helps communicate the things that are taking place. But then we expanded this year to get those into lots more places where we had more historical data to know what was actually taking place. And so we're getting some preliminary results there this year that, again, are very, very encouraging from a standpoint of we're meeting crop demand and we're actually gaining soil profile moisture without precipitation, which is pretty challenging to do. Certainly here in the Southwest, where we have extreme temperatures and lots of wind and low humidity a lot. And so, but to answer your question in regard to what that return on investment is, it's very quick. When you consider, most people can do the math very simply. For center pivots, we have it figured out very closely to when you consider the initial upfront investment, with the discounts that are available for multiple devices, you're talking about an $11 an acre investment. And when you consider a 30% reduction in applied water, that's a return on investment in just a month or two. And that's without considering whether yields are increased or any of these other soil conditions that we're seeing change that we know are going to be exponentially improved over time. And so again, we only have one season behind us to know how great this investment is. And it's only going to get better from there. So you consider that the devices that we're using, and we tested a lot of devices, a lot of different things we did last season, and arrived at a device that we're having manufactured for us called the Aqua Energizer, and you can find out about that on my website. But that device is actually fine-tuned to exactly the application that we wanted it for. And when you consider the 5-year warranty on those devices, knowing that, okay, for 5 years, this is not going to cost anything more than that $11 an acre is actually spread out over 5 years, which means, you're talking about a couple dollars an acre. Most farmers that I know, myself included, you can waste $2 an acre on nothing and not receive near the benefits that we are from what we're doing here. So again, that lends itself very handily to, if you're pumping water, you can't afford not to structure it, because even with all of the other things that I'm doing that I feel are very important to restore these ecosystems, there's nothing that you can spend money on to produce that kind of return on investment.
Wow. And just one more point, Chad, I don't know, is the government involved in any decisions that farmers have to make through this pandemic that we've had? Because one of the goals that I want, not only with educating people on structured water, but also educating them on any other obstacles that are going to come in the future, with the government telling the farmers that they can't produce because of some kind of contagion. Do we see that as a threat with farmers? I mean, you're close to the government and the mandates that are coming through. Is there a place where I can help educate farmers on ignoring, as much as I don't want to tell them to ignore the laws, but we need our farmers. The farmers are going to save us at the end of the day. And so we need to continue to farm no matter what. And how can we share with the farmers how to navigate these obstacles in this uncharted life that we're living right now?
That's a very challenging question, Sheena, but the real answer is in small changes right now, as quickly as possible. Change a few acres, change a little bit of your operation to understand how to do something that's a little bit different. It's very difficult to change on a very large scale because you have financial lenders involved, you have insurance companies involved, you have, obviously the government's involvement, and all of those things are, interrelated and not necessarily working for the benefit of the producer, but they are all working. And so, interestingly enough, most people don't know that the way the commodity subsidy system in the United States works, you cannot divert cropland to acres to fruits and vegetables without giving up your subsidy on the base acres that you have. And so what that means is, on any type of scale, a farmer can't afford to convert to growing a non-commodity crop, because everything that he has as a safety net is based on that commodity crop. And so, without going into the conspiracy of why things are set up that way, it's all based on a commodity system that is there only to allow some large entities, government as well as large corporations to capitalize on the flow of product. So it
So you're
doesn't
saying
really matter. Go ahead.
You're saying there's some fruits and vegetables you can't farm because of rules and regulations?
I'm saying on any scale. So in other words, let's say you're farming 1,000 acres and you decide you want to grow something different. You can only grow other commodities. You don't have to grow cotton. You don't have to grow corn, but you can't just go plant spinach on all of it. Or you can't just go plant these other things, or you will be in non-compliance and your subsidy will completely change.
Yeah, that's the bit. That's the bit where I'm going to, these rules and regulations. Do you think that back in the day, 100 years ago, that farmers were told that they can't grow spinach? These rules and regulations came from nowhere, and we need to get back our control on the farm,
Right. Well, the problem there is that, unfortunately, farmers have been classic for, wanting everything instead of, so in other words, you could look at that same scenario and say, well, you are free to grow whatever you want, but we're not going to bail you out if it doesn't work. You're not going to get a subsidy for it. You're not going to be able to insure it at a profit. You're not going to be able to do this, but if that's what you want to do, help yourself.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of other things that, you're free to do what you want, but here's the consequences.
Right. They're not going to support you in any way if you do. Yeah, I see.
No, and your safety net is gone. And so there are very few farmers who can afford to take on that kind of risk at any scale. That's why I'm saying it's a very limited amount of change that can happen at any one time. And so most producers who have, learned how to function in a different system have done so gradually over time.
Yeah.
And so they diverted a little bit. They figured out how to make that work. They did a little bit more, and then they eventually got to a spot of changing, their mindset enough to understand that, we don't have to do it that way.
Right. Well, we are coming up to some changes here on the planet, so
yes,
we need our farmers and we need our structured water. So,
right.
Do you have any closing thoughts, Chad, with what you're doing at Natural Ecosystem Restoration?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I thank you for asking me to share. I certainly enjoy getting the word out that the whole ecosystem is designed to function flawlessly, and I'm really amazed at how much resilience is in that system, such that when we start supporting it just a little bit and getting out of the way, it's amazing how quickly it can be restored.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Chad, for taking the time to talk to us. And if there's anybody that's interested, naturalecosystemrestoration.com. And Chad, and you can contact Jules as well. Jules is our Australian rep. But if there's people from all around the world, should they just get in touch with you, or?
Yes.
Do you have an email address you want to share?
Chad at Natural Eco Restoration, and I will make that correction. My web address is actually www.naturalecorestoration.com.
That's right.
The company is Natural Ecosystem Restoration.
That's right. Thank you so much, Chad.
Jules, do you have something?
Yeah, Chad. So, do you have a physical example of a water device, your aqua water device, in your office that we can have a look at?
I don't have one right here by me, but there are some pictures on the website of those devices actually on a center pivot machine.
And one more question. In terms of pesticides and so forth, are you limiting the use now that you're using structured water and the soil's good, that you use less chemicals on your crops?
Yes, we are definitely reducing, and we are, again, doing some research to validate exactly how much we can reduce. And a lot of the growers that I'm working with are actually organic growers. And so as we implement the whole system, we come to understand that, that organic regenerative production is actually what we should be striving for, because if we're doing things properly, that's where we're going to be anyway. And so it would be foolish not to capitalize on the market availability there, rather than the old paradigm in organic has been, in my opinion, if you use the conventional approach to organic and you try to capitalize on just the market premium, you're trying to deal with the same problems that conventional agriculture has,
Yes.
but you're using much more expensive and less effective tools to deal with the problems. And that's not a model that will work. And that's why a lot of people have suffered in that model, or even gone back to conventional, because they just couldn't afford to stay in that organic model. All of the things that we're doing, again, are focusing on that ecosystem being restored and functioning the way that it was intended, so that you don't need all of those tools. You actually are dealing with the problem at its root, getting the system to functioning well again, so that you don't have disease and insect problems, and you're not needing to use a bunch of fertilizers. And that's not the way the system was designed to work.
Correct. Thank you. That's great. Music to my ears.
Yes. Thank you so much, Chad. Natural Eco Restoration.
Thank you.
Excited for my new vegetables that are coming through.
Yes, awesome. Thank you.